It is time for the NFL tailgate party for bettors and fantasy football players alike. Guys, the 2-minute warning, world famous, goes back to the score phone days. It's now known as late info, but it did start out as the 2-minute warning. It is activated only when there are very special releases. We've got Big Red, who started out as a player on the score phones, became an offshore founder. He consults with odds makers, pro gamblers, handicappers, unique access to the sharpest bets. He does say the biggest bet so far this season in the NFL or college football, including preseason, goes at 1 o'clock Eastern Time. It's on the late info at offshoreinsiders.com. Right now, it is a biggie. All right, let's get into. We got a ton of information for you. The Chargers and the Bills. Teams that are off of a loss as a favorite do rebound in Week 2 at a 73-56-4 rate. Any record we give you is ATS unless I specify straight up, or of course over under. 62.1% when they're not a home favorite in this game, which Buffalo is not. That would favor them, and I'm sorry, that would actually favor the Chargers. Teams off a loss as a favorite would favor the Chargers, and when they're not a home favorite, now again, doesn't mean that they're a home underdog, or doesn't mean they're playing at home. When you exclude circumstances where they're a home favorite, it goes up to 62.1%, but that does favor the Chargers. However, home underdogs off of a loss of 40 or more are 10-3 against the spread. Now, both of those talk about overreaction. So many people overreact to what happened in the previous week. Now, in both of these cases, both of these teams looked very poor last week. Phillip Rivers, he's one of those predictably unpredictable guys. We always say that, when Rivers is looking poorly, he bounces back. Now, the truth is, it doesn't so much apply this week. It's a very small check mark in his favor. Yeah, the Bills are absolutely abysmal. A lot of people agree that Buffalo is the worst team in the league, but again, the odds makers are ahead of you. Keep in mind, home field advantage is worth 3 points, and the single biggest sucker play is when people like to bet against awful home teams at home. Joey Bosa, of course, is out for the Chargers, but back to what we were talking about, home underdogs of 7 or more, very solid, 53.6% in the history of our database. But, get this, only 33-40 when hosting a team off of a loss of 7 or more. So, when there is a potential for people to overreact to the other team, that is the exception. But yeah, home underdogs have always been a very solid play in the NFL, and we're talking about going back to the 1980s. Fading teams that average 3 points or less per game unless they are home favorites is 18-8. And that would favor San Diego. Now, I know what you're saying is, look, it's only one game. So how can you use season-to-date statistics? Well, again, that's kind of the point. The NFL is about overreaction. Approved sportsbooks, thoroughly vetted sportsbooks. If you want to always get paid on time, go to offshoreinsiders.com. Every sportsbook there has been thoroughly vetted. Josh Allen makes his first career start for Buffalo after going 7-15 last week. Underdogs of 6 or more off of a loss of 20 or more are 258, 213-7. It's a solid 54.8%. That would favor Buffalo. And home underdogs of 6.5 or more off a loss of 24 or more, 68 and 39 for 63.6%. That would favor Buffalo. But admittedly, this rare situation, only 4-8 since 2013. But again, the public's going to say, bet against Buffalo, bet against Buffalo. Remember, the odds makers are one step ahead of you, and it is all about overreaction. And yes, Ziggy Balls, thank you. A legendary man on Twitter. Very honest that you would be watching this. And again, we always welcome comments, especially so we know we're out there. And I know, it's still quite a few of you watch this on demand, not always live. And the truth is, especially since TalkShoe, which carries our audio podcast, and that's not broadcast live, but we send it out right away. Really excited about that a lot, our listenership on the audio podcast have gone up. And if you're listening to us on the podcast, wherever you're listening, please give us a like, or Periscope, give us a heart. And if you're listening on the audio podcast, please give us a 5-star rating, wherever you're listening to us, Stitcher and whatnot. Ziggy does like the Bills. Eagles and the Buccaneers. Tampa, of course, was terrible last season. We still think they come into this season undervalued, especially with Jameis Winston out. You know, Jameis Winston, it's not like he's been all that fantastic himself. So, you know, Ryan Fitzmagic did have a spectacular game last week. This is a battle of two of the best backup quarterbacks in the NFL. Of course, neither team has their starting quarterback, but Nick Foles against Ryan Fitzpatrick, both are experienced as starters. Wide receiver Deshaun Jackson has been upgraded to probable for Tampa. 5 catches in week 1, 106 the previous 2 years, so that's no small injury update. Road favorites that had at least 200 fewer total yards than their opponent did the previous week, 20-9. And that's one of those, you know, listen to what the odds makers are telling you. You know, Tampa had, of course, a spectacular week last week. Philadelphia offensively did not. But when the odds makers tell you that team that's off of the much worse offensive performance is a favorite, listen to what they're saying. At least that's what that angle says. And yes, thank you to Carrie DeAngelis. Great to hear you again. Nice to hear from you, Carrie, for sure. The Eagles, Darren Sproles is out. Very key player. You know, he's a great breakaway running back, capable of that 80-yard run on a screen pass at any point. The Eagles' Alshon Jeffrey, who had 5 straight seasons of 52 or more catches, is out. And it's funny, I don't even know what Carrie says to hear me again, but it's funny, I do I'm a guest on a lot of podcasts, and an honor to have been a guest on the Winners and Whiners podcast, and the host Scott Steen, a very nice guy. He's like, you know, when I interviewed you, I didn't really recognize your voice, but once I was listening to one of your reports, one of these reports, he's like, yeah, now I remember your voice from the score phone. So I don't know, you know, when Carrie says, great to hear you again, if he's talking about from, you know, he watched us last year when we did it in conjunction with SBR, or he's one of those, every now and then somebody's like, and it hasn't happened as much. Look, the internet's been around for a while, but especially like 6-7 years ago, somebody would be like, yeah, I loved your picks on the internet, on the score phones, and I'm just discovering you. I didn't realize you're on the internet. So that hasn't happened a lot lately. We're getting a couple people, well, 2 people under 2 different screen names on Periscope asking Cook or Connor. Yeah, I know when I say fantasy football, I actually haven't played fantasy football in literally 18 years. A lot of overlapping information. So we have great information as far as injuries and matchups. I'm not a huge fantasy football guy, but yeah, thank you to Carrie, who says he's been following me for years. And nice to see people checking in on both Periscope and on YouTube. I know it's weird, really a lower, we actually get a lot lower viewership on our Facebook page, and there's something, I don't know, there was some security thing where I think it's a little tougher to comment on Facebook, but thankfully very easy on both Periscope and YouTube. The Colts and the Redskins, teams off a loss as a favorite, rebound in week 2 at a 73, 56, and 4 rate. That would favor the Colts. 62.1% when not a home favorite this year. And thank you for those people who are checking in on Periscope. And how do you pronounce your name? Root? Well, I don't even know how you pronounce it, but also Humboldt Parker and Ziggy Balls also checking in. He says the Eagles off a long rest. Fitzmagic runs out if he takes a step back. Yeah, the Eagles are definitely off the long rest. They played on the opening Thursday night game, and we've studied that. You know, Ziggy Balls does bring up a good point. We've studied that. You know, my theory used to be, as a general rule of thumb, and it's true more so in the NBA, and make sure, you know, NBA, heck, it's what, only about 2 months or so away. as a general rule of thumb, but again, this applies a little bit more in the NBA than any other sport, rest benefits the teams that need rest. When teams are playing well, you don't want them to have rest. When they're not playing well, you do want them to have rest. So it gives a chance for the Eagles to at least make some adjustments on offense. That general theory, and I'm not saying to bet the over, but that general theory would say that the Eagles' offense would rebound this week and would have a much better effort. But, yeah, so thank you, Ziggy Balls, for bringing that up about the rest. Going against favorites of 2 or more, if it's their first game as a favorite, 209, 168, and 15, that benefits the Colts. And, yes, it does very much include week 2. And, yeah, Russell Wilson against the Bears. I'm a huge Russell Wilson guy. That being said, I'm not that familiar with the fantasy football scoring anymore. I know people go by the, go a little bit more by the, there's a standard scoring that has to do with yards. So, again, I haven't played fantasy football in years. Back then, it was the low-tech days. Russell Wilson, though, is one of those guys who I think is a much better NFL quarterback than he is a fantasy football quarterback because he doesn't put up those great numbers. Obviously, Seattle doesn't have a high-powered offense. They're one of those keep the defense off of the field guys. So I think Russell Wilson is a poster child of a guy who is a very good NFL quarterback, isn't necessarily a spectacular fantasy football quarterback. Of course, the Bears have a very solid defense, very good defense. They're hoping that they're going to get an offense this year. Everyone in Chicago, if you're a Bears fan, you're hoping that Mitchell Trubisky is this year's Jared Goff. I've got my doubts, to be honest with you. But, again, without really being familiar with the intricacies of how the fantasy football scoring now works, Russell Wilson, like I said, is the poster child of a guy that is probably better in real life than he is in fantasy football. And the Bears do have a rock-solid defense, so I'm not sure that I'm madly in love with that. A solid momentum angle that has to do with undefeated teams versus winless teams under specific circumstances that apply today. 70, 49, and 2, and that favors the Redskins. But again, yes, of course, it's week 2. But week 2, NFL is about overreaction. And yes, it does apply when a team is 1-0 against a team that is 0-1. Skins are, I said it entering the year. I talked about a lot in the offseason. I'm not a huge Kirk Cousins fan. I'm not convinced that there's a big drop-off from Cousins to Smith. So I think the Skins are one of those teams that I had marked off as kind of undervalued coming into the year. Colts, you could argue, a little bit overvalued. Andrew Luck, even if he is the comeback player of the year, expect some rust. Of course, yeah, he's got a game under his belt and, passed the ball a little bit more than a lot of people thought. Still, I think when you're talking about generically undervalued versus overvalued, that would benefit the Redskins. Anthony Costanzo, look, the Colts, they are ravaged. They are ravaged on their offensive line. Costanzo, early in the week, was considered probable. Now he is out. So you've got a ravaged offensive line protecting a fragile quarterback. Home teams that in week 2 covered by 7 or more the previous week. This is a surprise. This is actually a surprise as Ziggy Balls, again, talks about the Redskins should not be this high of a favorite. This does surprise me because this kind of goes against my overreaction thing. That being said, a little bit of a small sample size and not statistically overwhelming, but, something to keep in mind for those people who just blindly like to be contrarian and bet that there will be overreaction. Home teams in week 2 that covered by 7 or more the previous week are actually 39, 29, and 4. That would favor Washington. Andrew Luck, a stunning 22 and 6, again, against the spread, off of a straight-up loss, covering by an average of 6.9 points per game, and 10 and 1 Andrew Luck is when posted as an underdog in those situations, covering by an average of 13.4 points per game. And if you do like this information, I do thank a lot of you for making some comments. Please feel free to literally like it, or if you're watching on Periscope, give us a heart, a share, embed, retweet. That'll definitely help us, and it's a nice vote of confidence. And the experts tell us that the search engines like it, quite frankly. So please, if you like us, literally like us. Panthers and the Falcons going against favorites of 2 or more if it's their first game as a favorite. 209, 168, and 15. That would benefit the Panthers. We already talked about, yes, I know it's week 2. So if you're joining us on our live broadcast, yes, we know it's week 2, and I comment on that a little bit earlier. Looks like Falcons will be without Devontae Freeman. He averages 4.3 yards per carry in his career, twice rushed for over 1,000 yards, no small injury. But Carolina banged up as well. Curtis Samuel, Damari Byrd, guard Trey Turner, they're all out. Samuel, 15 receptions in 9 games. Byrd had 9 catches last year, 10 catches last year. So it has a lot to do with the Panthers' depth at wide receiver. And bigger than that, really banged up on their offensive line. Matt Khalil, Darrell Williams, and superstar tight end Greg Olsen remains out. So are there any weapons for Cam Newton to throw to? Not really. Carolina does not have many offensive weapons. Playoff teams from the previous season. Oh, wait a minute. I almost skipped the most important thing. Atlanta with 2 devastating injuries on their defense last week. Deion Jones and Keanu Neal both out. Big injuries for the Falcons defense. Playoff teams from the previous season, 42 and 28 against the spread in week 2 home openers. Cam Newton, 29 and 19 against the spread as an underdog, including 8 and 6 straight up in the last 14, winning 9 units. You know, I have a long list of guys that I think are predictably unpredictable. Cam Newton is arguably moving towards the top of that list by predictably unpredictable. What I say is when a guy, is starting to look bad all of a sudden, a true Jekyll and Hyde guy, a guy who could literally look like a Hall of Famer one week and a second-string quarterback the next week, they are very dangerous as underdogs. You want to go with them as underdogs, against them as favorites, and that is a Cam Newton. Statistically, it says he is that type of quarterback, and my eyes say that as well. Browns and the Saints, teams off a loss as a favorite, rebound in week 2 at a 73, 56, and 4 rate. That would benefit the Saints. Fade teams that have no more than 1 win their last 22 straight up. Obviously, that goes over multiple seasons. That would say to go with the Saints. Teams off a loss as a large favorite do bounce back. Remember, this is a theme here at a 95 and 66 rate. That says go with the Saints. I say it, I think, every week. I may have even said it on this broadcast. The NFL is the #1 regression to the mean sport. A team is never as bad as they look at their worst, or as good as they look at their best. Now, that's kind of obvious, maybe not the best way to phrase that, but the NFL, that whatever team looks the worst the previous week, whatever team looks the best the previous week, usually going to be overreaction, and so many of these angles said that. Remember, the Browns are off of that rare tie, mentally draining, but the Saints loss, the Saints are a good team, so you could probably argue that the Browns tie was mentally draining, but the Saints loss a lot more motivating. Teams off of a tie are only 6 and 14 against the spread, so that would say go with the Saints. And again, when a team is off of a tie, what does that mean? They played all 15 minutes of overtime, so they literally played a quarter more than their opponent did the previous week, and of course the game went down to the wire. So in many cases, their starters played more than 15 minutes more, so it does make sense fading teams off of a tie because it means they went all the way in overtime. Of course, Saints still without Mark Ingram, who is suspended. 1,124 yards rushing last year, averages 4.5 yards per carry, and 5,362 lifetime yards. New Orleans, do you believe in look-aheads? Look, we actually wrote an article. Go to joeduffy.net, right? Not right now, but at some point after this broadcast. And we wrote an article about the myth of the look-ahead in college football. Also found in the NFL. I don't think the look-ahead is really a big angle, but you know how I like to take that I report, you decide approach on this? If you're big in the look-aheads, the Saints are looking ahead to could be looking ahead to their big rival, Atlanta, next week. Yeah, what a tragic story. The Browns, of course, were the chic bet for a lot of people this year. I know even in Vegas and offshore, a lot of people bet on them to win the division, even, go to the Super Bowl. Everyone's looking for that great long shot. Looks like the Browns and Josh Gordon are done. Gordon is one of these guys, if he ever got his head on straight, could be one of the most dangerous weapons in the NFL, and I think that's why a lot of people were taking a shot at the Browns as such a long shot, but the Browns are cutting. Looks like they're going to cut ties with Josh Gordon. Will not be there today. They haven't actually officially cut him, but he's not playing today. They're trying to trade him. They're probably going to wind up cutting him. I don't know if anyone's going to offer anything more than, and how many rounds are there now in the NFL? Eight rounds. You're not going to get anything for him. Somebody will take a chance on him when he gets cut, but anyway, he's not playing today, and that's the most important thing. Browns without one of the best pass rushers in Emmanuel Ogbah. New Orleans defense more healthy this week. Saints are the top scoring home offense since 2015. Probably not a surprise to anybody there. Now, when the Saints home games has gone up by it's going up, but not by more than 2 points. The over is 23-10. Now, keep in mind, again, I like to either bet on teams that underachieved the previous years or bet against teams that overachieved. You could argue that the most overachieving unit last year was the Saints defense. Well, they were certainly the most improved defense last year. Is there some regression to the mean? They were torched for 529 yards and 48 points to back up Ryan Fitzpatrick last week. I think one of the great questions for anybody, NFL observers, to ask is, how good is the Saints defense? I mean, is the Saints defense that we had seen in years prior to last year and certainly last week, or are the Saints defense, are they the most improved defense in the NFL that we saw last year, where last year they were actually one of the better defenses? I don't think the Saints defense is very good. I think they're going to be a lot closer to worse than first this year. Cardinals and the Rams, teams off a loss as a favorite, rebound in week 2 at a 73-56-4 rate. That favors the Cardinals. 62.1% when a team is not a home favorite this game. And Cards starting offensive tackle Andrew Smith is out. And we do thank Ziggy for his comments, and you should be able to see them on screen regardless of where you're watching, of course, unless you're listening to the audio podcast. Again, mybookie.ag, big sponsor. I've been in this business for 30, well, I always say 30 years. I always think of when I'm full-time. Remember, I worked for Dial Sports when I was in college. So I've actually been in this business for about 32 years, I guess, 33 years. I will not, and I built up a great reputation. Look, I'm not going to lie to you. The picks of last, it hasn't been the greatest start for me in football, frankly, but it's early. But, I built up a very good reputation over the years. I'm not going to throw that out the window by sending you to a sports book that doesn't pay you on time. Any single sports book I mention on offshoreinsiders.com will pay you on time. MyBookie.ag will give you whatever the largest bonus is that they're giving away at the time. If you use the promo code Duffy, D-U-F-F-Y, easy deposit, very easy withdrawal. You'll get your money within 48 hours of requesting withdrawal, usually closer to 24. You'll get paid in full each and every time. I've known before there was a MyBookie.ag. I have a relationship with some of the principals there going back before that. Truly run by professionals, truly run by business people, and sharp lines, literally anything you want. And there are only about a half dozen sports books that you're certain to always get paid on time. MyBookie.ag is one of them. Go to offshoreinsiders.com for the list of the rest. Lions and the 49ers. Teams off a loss as a favorite do rebound in week 2. 73-56-4. The Lions, and again, 62.1% when they're not a home favorite in this game. And again, the biggest play in the industry, offshoreinsiders.com. Big 1 o'clock game. Go against favorites of 2 or more if it's their first game as a favorite, 209, 168, and 15. Again, if you're joining us in the middle of the broadcast, I addressed earlier in the broadcast. You can rewatch it from the beginning. Yes, I know it's week 2, but it is still significant. Lions starting tackle T.J. Lang is out. Jimmy Garoppolo, look, NFL quarterbacks, it's amazing. It's so much easier. It's a cliche, but it has handicapping applications. So much easier to be the hunter than the hunted. Jimmy Garoppolo is now facing the burden of high expectations. Many examples of quarterbacks being a great fade once they go from the hunter to the hunter to the hunted. So keep in mind, Jimmy Garoppolo, is he for real? That's another $1 million question, literally, for the sports books. This one surprises me, and I will get, Carrie DeAngelis. I do think the Saints should certainly be very safe for survivor pools, indeed. A couple of the rules for the survivor, I haven't done those in a couple years either, but be careful as far as going with road teams. I never take a road team in a survivor unless you're talking about where you run out of the teams and you have only a few teams left that you can pick. But certainly early in the year, don't go with road teams, in part because the quality road teams, they're going to be better as a home team somewhere along the line. Now, that being said, this somewhat contradicts it. Do not save a team. Don't outsmart yourself. The only exception where I do believe in quote-unquote saving a team is not to go with road teams, and home field advantage is worth so much. I've heard a theory, it's an interesting theory, about not to go with the biggest favorite. The theory behind that is everyone else is going to be going, well, not everyone else. So many people are going to be going with the biggest favorite. It gives you an opportunity to root against them. Like last week, I know so many people are out of their survivor pool because they went with the Saints last week. And that's an interesting theory. I'm not saying I agree with it, but I have definitely heard from, sharp people say never go with the biggest favorite, because if the biggest favorite loses, so many people are going to be eliminated, and that puts you in great position. That's an interesting theory. But, yes, I do think the Saints should certainly win outright. I think the Saints, well, there's no such thing as a safe play, but the Saints are definitely a smart play as far as betting on survival pools. And let's see, hopefully Ziggy Balls, there we go. Wanted to add your comment as well. This surprises me. Matt Stafford is 7-14-1 as an underdog of 6 or more. Why does that surprise me? Because Stafford is one of those predictably unpredictable guys like Cam Newton. Stafford, you would think, would be one of these guys that wins games that he shouldn't and loses games that he should win. But again, I report, you decide, and that's one of the reasons why I have my computer software to confirm theories. Most of my theories, what my eyes and my memory says, turn out to be true, but there are 30% of them that tend to be false. But again, I'm not big. It's not like I ever blindly bet on Stafford as an underdog or for him as a favorite, but one of those stats that does surprise me a little bit. Underdogs of 6 or more off of a loss of 20 or more are 258, 213, and 7 for 54.8%. That favors the Lions. Giants and the Cowboys. In fact, I think I have another one. I think I have more notes on this. I moved it to the end. I don't put these in book order, just basically as the information comes in. But going against favorites of 2 or more, if it's their first game as a favorite, again, a good fade. We talked about that. That would say go with the Giants. The Texans and the Titans, the same stat we just talked about, going against favorites. That would favor the Titans. Titans quarterback Marcus Mariota looks like he will play, but all the experts out there say he's going to be limited. Don't be surprised if you see journeyman Blaine Gabbert get some playing time as well. A lot of the good sources out there, a lot of the sharps, do wonder if Mariota will play the entire game. I think by design, Blaine Gabbert's going to get some snaps. Journeyman indeed. He's not. I would take both Nick Foles and Ryan Fitzmagic over Blaine Gabbert, but that's something to watch. I do think Mariota will play, will not be 100%. And keep in mind, Mariota is one of these guys, because he's so mobile, that when he's less than 100%, I think that's bigger than, say, a guy like Tom Brady, who isn't quite the athlete. But, then conversely, Aaron Rodgers, and we'll talk about him. Aaron Rodgers, when he's not 100% healthy, he's incredible. I do think when Mariota is not 100%, that is bigger news than it is with a lot of other people. Texans star wide receiver DeAndre Hopkins is questionable. He's going to be limited if he does play, according to our sources. But even more devastating, the Texans will be walking wounded at wide receiver. They don't have really any guy at wide receiver who's not banged up. And again, Deshaun Watson, I love the guy. I'm not if you've been following me for a while, you know that I don't like to bet on a lot of the futures, because I want my mind clean. I don't want to be biased by any bets I made in preseason, but I did say, not as actual bets, but a prediction, for those of you who like to do the fantasy football type bets, I would take just about any Deshaun Watson prop over the total. But I guess I was kind of going against my golden rule, the burden of high expectations and all that. And so far, he's looked so-so. But again, he's coming off of an injury, so I'm not giving up on him yet. I still think Deshaun Watson could be one of the top quarterbacks in the NFL, and he's not going to have a lot of weapons today. So I'm not that big, for those of you who are fantasy football players. Again, I'm not quite as familiar with the current scoring on how it works, but I think Deshaun Watson's one of those guys. If you have a couple good quarterbacks and you have an option of not starting Deshaun Watson today, I probably would not start him. Going against teams that open the season with back-to-back road games, betting them in the second of back-to-back road games, again, going against them. So betting against teams like that. 28-16, including 15-4 over the very recently. That would say to go with Tennessee. And, of course, including walking wounded, you could argue that Tennessee is the most injured offense, but both of these teams banged up. So simply by going only by the injury report, you would say the under could be a sharp play there. Patriots and the Jaguars, and I like to say Jaguars. Leonard Fournette, now morning reports say he's been downgraded to doubtful. He was considered a game-time decision. I don't think he's officially been ruled out, but the early morning tea leaves say he will probably not play. 9 carries, 45 yards last week off of a season which he rushed for 1,040 yards at 3.9 yards per carry. And when I'm saying that, look, I've been on the air for 32 minutes and, was doing some prep before that. So I'm saying it's quite possible he's been officially ruled out since we've gone on the air. New England running back by committee, but they are banged up. So, New England, they're hurt with some offensive weapons. No surprise here, but Tom Terrific. Actually, maybe it is surprise that it's this good. Tom Brady, 44-19-5 against the spread. The AFC foes with a winning percentage above 500. The Vikings and the Packers. Packers quarterback Aaron Rodgers. He practiced Saturday for the first time. He's actually listed as probable, and that's good. Backups DeShone Kizer and Tim Boyle. Whew, that's a big drop-off. He likely will have his weapon, Devontae Adams. And by the way, before this report's out, I'm going to tell you where the sharp money's going, where the public money is going, and the biggest line moves. Of course, biggest line moves usually have to do with injuries. Obviously, one of the bigger line moves is on Green Bay and Minnesota. Miami and the Jets. I think that was an Elton John song. Dolphins wide receiver Devontae Parker is probable. 56 catches. And 57 catches the last 2 years. So he's a good weapon. Going against favorites of 2 or more, if it's your first game as a favorite. Very good play. That says go with the Dolphins. Teams off of impressive. This is somewhat of a surprise here. Teams off of impressive primetime wins are actually a go with. 123, 72, and 8. Now, why do I say that's a surprise? Again, people tend to overreact to what they saw the previous week. And yeah, even in 2018, the primetime games are still the higher profile. I tell the story. I know a guy who's been in the business actually longer than me. There are a few people who've been in the business longer than me. And he was famous. I talked to him, and he would say, I can't figure the Jets out, or whatever team you're talking about. But since we're talking about the Jets, I can't figure the Jets out. I saw them 2 weeks ago, and they looked terrible. And then last week, they were sensational. And again, I'm not going to mention this guy's name, but that's what the NFL is. In the NFL, you bet on unpredictability. But that's why I'm a little surprised that teams that actually look good on prime time are good to bet with the next week. Linebacker Josh Martin is out for the Jets. 14 games, 9 starts last year. Defensive back Marcus May is out. 16 starts last year. Combined, 79 tackles. So Jets got some key defensive injuries. Left guard Josh Sitton, who played every offensive snap in Game 1, is out for the year. 4-time Pro Bowler. Ted Larson takes over, but he does have 73 starts. Jets 2-6 against the spread under Todd Bowles off a win as an underdog the previous week, failing by an average of 9.2 points per game. Again, the biggest plays in the industry and thoroughly vetted sportsbooks right now at offshoreinsiders.com. The Chiefs and the Steelers. Benji Roethlisberger did miss practice this week. He is probable, though, for the Steelers. Looks like he will play. Roethlisberger, one of the all-time great splits quarterbacks, especially for those of you who play fantasy football. He's got a 99.1 career quarterback rating at home compared to just 88.7 on the road. So, yes, much better at home than on the road. Le'Veon Bell remains out for the Steelers, superstar running back. Remember we told you teams off of a tie are only 6-14. That would say to fade the Steelers into the circumstances, and I explained why I think that's significant earlier on. So if you're joining us live, remember you can watch this on demand. Ziggy Balls does like the Patriots on the money line. Yeah, that, knee-jerk reaction when I looked at the lines, that was the line that surprised me the most. I know Jacksonville took the big step last year, but, Gronk, the bulletin board material with Ramsey. It's my belief, and Ziggy brings up a good point, but you know what? Guys like Gronkowski, one of the greatest tight ends ever, he doesn't need to be motivated by someone else talking trash on him. It's like when Deion Sanders would talk trash on Jerry Rice. People are like, man, why do you want to anger him? Guys like Gronkowski, Jerry Rice, they're going to the Hall of Fame because they're not sitting around waiting for somebody else on the other team to fire them up. Gronkowski always comes to play, and if anything, you could argue that a guy like Gronkowski, maybe you can rattle him, maybe you can take him off his game. The old Jimmy Johnson, if you're going to walk the walk, talk, or if you're going to talk the talk, you got to walk the walk. Yeah, I know of a handicapper out there who's big into the intangibles. To me, you don't want to fire up underachieving guys. I'm more worried about when someone talks trash on underachieving guys, and, you could wake those guys up. Gronkowski would not be one of those. But fading home favorites off of a tie is a very good play. Chief star safety, Eric Berry's doubtful. This is big. This will open up the passing game for Pittsburgh. Ben Roethlisberger is the most profitable quarterback to the under when you fade a line move. He goes under 49-37, and this total is going from 49.5 to 54. We're going to take a look at the totals. In fact, why don't we actually do that? Take a look at some of the latest lines at mybookie.ag. Some of the lines have certainly moved. The odds there make it look like the odds makers have their doubts whether Aaron Rodgers is going to play. Very interesting line there. And we talked about the Steelers line at 52 now. And yeah, the total is definitely, that's one where the total is definitely going to move based on some tea leaves and who's warming up. Antonio Brown, last 4 games of the Chiefs, averaging 6 receptions for 113 yards. Go against teams that scored 28 points or more the previous week. 52-38, that would say to fade KC. And, of course, go with Pittsburgh. 7-17 if they also allowed 28 points or more the previous week. The Raiders and the Broncos. Oakland down both starting defensive tackles. Raiders short week, and then they're going to the high altitude. Remember, Denver does very well at home early in the year, especially the first 2 weeks. And the theory being that, the high altitude really can take their toll on players. And the thinking being early in the year, with so many teams not playing their starters that much in the preseason, that they're not in quite as much game shape, and Denver's home field advantage is bigger early in the year. Underdogs of 6 or more off a loss of 20 or more, 258, 213, and 7 for 54.8%. That would benefit the Raiders, and again, that consistent with our overreaction theory. All right, yeah, I told you I knew I had more notes. I alluded to this game earlier. Giants and the Cowboys, 2 winless teams, go against the underdog, 88, 66, and 5. And again, yes, we talked earlier in this report. Of course, it applies in week 2 as well. We allude to it. Again, if you're watching, if you joined us live, please watch us from the beginning. You can watch us from the beginning on demand. Cowboys, look, they got nobody to catch the ball. They have no weapons. No weapons. Their best weapon is Zeke Elliott out of the backfield. Just 69 yards last week on only 15 carries, which is bizarre. So, pretty good yards per carry. But I think it's a legitimate question to ask. Zeke Elliott, physical running back. He's the type of running back who's not going to have a long shelf life. Is it already? Is he already banged up a little bit? When he came back from a suspension last year, he was pretty mediocre. Is Zeke Elliott truly among the elite running backs? He plays that style that he's going to take a beating, and I don't think he's going to have a long NFL career, and he's already trending downward. 6-year starting linebacker Olivier Vernon is out for the Giants. Dallas, 61% against the spread at home winning percentage under Jason Garrett. That would probably be a surprise to some. Biggest line moves, and again, this was at the beginning of our broadcast, and of course, in this case, it depends on shop around because you're going to have varying juice. Green Bay opened up at 2.5. Now, Green Bay opened up laying 2.5. They're now getting 2.5, or as you can see at mybookie.ag, getting 3, but with low juice. Jets open up as a pick to Miami, now at -3. New Orleans went from -7 to -9.5. All right, these are lines at mybookie.ag. We're going to have these sharp moves, and public moves coming up in a moment. But again, make a deposit at mybookie.ag. Put a lot of work into this free stuff that I give you, and I'll be happy to do it. Please show your support. It's a win-win for everybody. MyBookie.ag will definitely pay you on time. They'll definitely give you the biggest sign-up bonus in the industry. Easy deposit, easy withdrawal. If you use the promo code Duffy, D-U-F-F-Y, you're saying you want more information like this. Now, I always said I'll be happy to do this. We kind of do a modified version of this on Saturday mornings. If you'd like a detailed version, I would do it. Make sure you play the sports books. Make sure you make bets with the handicappers at offshoreinsiders.com and use our sports books. Please click on them at offshoreinsiders.com. Biggest bets this week based on percentage of bets, generally considered to be the square bets. Houston, LA Chargers, Minnesota, and Philadelphia. Percentage of money. Sometimes these are overlapping. This week they are. Sometimes they can conflict, and sometimes there's not a correlation. Biggest bets based on percentage of money at Vegas and offshore sportsbooks. Minnesota, Philadelphia, San Fran, LA Chargers, New Orleans, and Houston. And, all right, folks, again, please visit us at offshoreinsiders.com. Make no mistake about it. Late info, going back to the score phone days, the biggest bet in any time late info is activated. Sometimes it can go a couple weeks without being activated, not so much during football season. Anytime late info is activated, it is without question the biggest bet by anybody in the industry. Offshoreinsiders.com is the vet at sportsbooks. Offshoreinsiders.com has handicappers that have been winning since last century. Visit it. OffshoreInsiders.com. Thanks for all the participation. Thanks for everyone who's watching. A lot of you are watching the rebroadcast anyway as well. Thanks to everybody. We'll talk to you during the week, and then our regularly scheduled live broadcast next Sunday, 10 a.m. Eastern Time.